Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video we're going to be talking about how to read music on the piano, so let's get straight into it. On the piano, each of the white keys is a letter between A and G, so the musical alphabet is A, B, C, D, E, F and G. And these notes repeat on the piano over and over again, so once you've got to G, then the next note is A and it starts again. When reading music, we read music off of something called a stave, and a stave is 5 horizontal lines. We place dots on these stave to represent an individual key on the piano. Dots on the stave can either be on a space or on a line, and if you need to go further than the stave, then you can create your own extra lines, and these are called ledger lines. How we interpret these notes on the 5 lines is determined by something called a clef, and this is at the beginning of the stave. The 2 clefs that we use for piano music is the treble clef and the bass clef. The treble clef is usually played by the right hand and represents the top half of the piano. The bass clef is usually played by the left hand and represents the bottom half of the piano. This means that it is important to find a note somewhere in the middle of the piano that represents a crossover point between what you would read in the bass clef and what you'd read in the treble clef, and this is middle C. We can find any C on the piano by finding the 2 black notes and playing the white key that's just to the left of those 2 black notes. Middle C is the C that is closest to the middle of the piano. It is also the 4th C from the bottom of the piano. In treble clef, middle C is written below the 5 lines on the first ledger line. This exact dot on the page represents middle C and middle C only. The next white key up from C is the next letter in the alphabet, so that's D, and this is just in the space that is above middle C on the page. Then moving up, we have E on the first line, we have F in the first space, we have G in the second line, and so on. The next key above G is A, because we're starting again with the alphabet, so you can carry on the pattern from there, and that would be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and so on. In the bass clef, middle C is written above the stave on the first ledger line. This is the exact same note as middle C in treble clef. It's just written above the 5 lines rather than below the 5 lines. And from here, we work down the piano. So 1 before C is B, and 1 before B is A, and then 1 before that is G, F, E, D, C, B, A, and so on. The problem with this is that it's quite difficult to work backwards in the alphabet, especially when you are working in bass clef. So there are several better methods that we can use to remember the notes. The first of these is using acronyms to remember where the notes are on the stave. So for treble clef, each of the lines, E, G, B, D and F, can be given a word to help remember those, and those are every good boy deserves food. The spaces for treble clef spell out the word face, so you can just remember face is space. In bass clef, each of the lines are G, B, D, F and A, and you can remember great big dogs frighten Albert for this one. And in the spaces, it's A, C, E, G, so all cows eat grass. However, once again, with this method, there is another problem, and that is that you may be able to remember where the notes are on the stave, but you are not going to be able to relate those to where they are on the actual piano. So the best method for combating this is a method called the landmark method. For this method, you will just have 5 notes to remember in each of the clefs, to help you remember all of the notes on the piano. The first landmark in treble clef is middle C, and from here you know that if the note is 1 note higher, it's going to be D, and if it's 1 note lower, it's going to be B. And if the note is 2 notes higher than C, then you just go C, D, E, and that's an E. The next note to remember is G. Now this G is on the second line up, and if you remember this G, you know that the note above that is an A, and the note below that is an F, and so on. Now the landmarks that you need to remember are all the C's and G's. So there is middle C, there is G that's on the second line up, there is a C in the second space down, a G just above the 5 lines, and a C 2 ledger lines up. Once you have memorized these notes and you know exactly where they are on the piano, it becomes a lot easier to read all of the notes on the piano. And at the very least, you will know whereabouts on the piano you are going to be looking for the notes, because you will relate notes in that area to an area of the piano. For the bass clef, we can use a similar idea. So the first landmark to remember is middle C. As I said before, middle C is above the 5 lines on its own ledger line. So you know if the note is one note lower than this, then it's a B, and if it's one note higher than this, then it's a D. For the left hand, the next landmark will be an F, because this is 5 notes lower than middle C. When we did the treble clef, we did middle C and we did 5 notes higher, which was the G. But in the left hand, we're going to do 5 notes lower, which is an F. So the F is on the second line down, and from here you can work out that in the space above that it's a G, and in the space below that it's an E. So the 5 landmarks to remember for the bass clef are middle C, which has got its own ledger line above the 5 lines, F, which is on the second line down, C, which is on the second space up, F, which is below the 5 lines, and C, which is 2 ledger lines down. And when you are trying to memorize these, try and play them on the piano as well. So you'll start on middle C in the treble clef, and then you'll go up to the G, and then up even higher to the C, up even higher to the G, and then so on. And the same in the bass clef. You'll start with C, and then go down to F, even further to C, even further to F, and so on. Once you have memorized each of the notes in these clefs, then you should be able to find all of the notes around those 5 landmarks as well. The other thing to talk about with note reading is the black notes, also known as sharps and flats. So a sharp looks like a hashtag, and it just means 1 up. An example of this would be if you were to play a C, and then you played the nearest black note 1 up from a C. This would be a C sharp. We can see this written in music by having the hashtag symbol written next to the note that it applies to. A flat looks like a small letter B, and this just means 1 down. So that C sharp that you've just played is also a D flat, because it is 1 note lower than the D. Often in music, sharps and flats recur a lot of times, so what we do is we write these at the beginning of the line, and this is called a key signature. The sharps or flats are written here on the lines or spaces that they're going to affect. So for example, if you see a sharp sign on the top line in treble clef, this is an F. So all of the Fs in this particular piece will be F sharp instead of F. And this doesn't just apply to the F that's on that line, that will also apply to every other F. So that includes the F that's in the bottom space. And if there is an F sharp in the treble clef, you will always see an F sharp in the bass clef as well, so that both the hands are dealing with the same notes. Now that you can read all of the notes on the piano and understand what sharps and flats are, the next thing to talk about is rhythm. So when we talk about rhythm, we are talking about how long you play the notes for. We count notes in music using a unit called beats. Each note is a certain amount of beats depending on what it looks like. So a 1 beat note is a dot with a stem, and this is called a crotchet. A 2 beat note is a hollow dot with a stem, and this is called a minim. A 4 beat note is just a hollow dot without a stem, and this is called a semibreve. A half beat note is a dot with a stem and a tail, and this is called a quaver. And a quarter beat note is a dot and a stem and 2 tails, and this is called a semiquaver. Once you get to a quarter note, which is a semiquaver, if you keep adding tails, it just keeps on halving the value of the note. You can also add a dot next to the note, and this will add half of the note's original value on top. So, for example, if you have a 1 beat note, a crotchet, and you add a dot next to it, this becomes 1 plus half of 1, and that's 1.5 beat note. Or a minim, this is a 2 beat note. If it has a dot next to it, this is a 2 beat note, plus 1, because that's half of 2, and you add that on top, so you make 3. When reading music, it is important to keep a regular pulse of 1 beat notes in your head. And then each of your note lengths needs to relate to this. For example, if you are playing a 2 beat note, you need to count 1, 2, and you need to hold it for that full length. But if you are playing a 4 beat note, you need to count 1, 2, 3, 4. And notice that my counting was regular, so I didn't change the speed of my counting, whether it was a 2 beat note or a 4 beat note. If you have any questions about reading music, or you want to add anything to what I have said, then leave a comment. And if you found this video useful, then hit a like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.